What made you switch from Trump to Nikki Haley?
The man is a lunatic, and I think he's terrible for the country.
What are you thinking about when you say that?
Just that he lies, he cheats, he's bankrupted millions of businesses and people, and I don't see anything good about him.
Let me ask, if Donald Trump is the nominee in November, do you support Joe Biden over Donald Trump?
No.
America is speaking, well, one American at least, saying Donald Trump is terrible, but she still won't support Joe Biden. Huh. So what happens now? Is Biden capable of flipping the Nikki Haley voters? Or will they come home and vote for Trump since he's the Republican, vote third party, or just stay home? Joining me now is Sarah Matthews, former Trump White House Deputy Press Secretary. This is the puzzle. Thank you for being here, Sarah, because I've heard tons of these. That the person says, there was one person who said that literally called Trump a lunatic. But then when asked, okay, will you vote for Biden? They said, oh, no, absolutely not. Well, and in the end, they sort of came back to, if it's down to the two of them, they'd still vote for Trump, who they called a lunatic. What does Biden say? What could he say to get that person who thinks Trump is terrible to vote for him?
Look, exactly. I think there are going to be a fraction of these Nikki Haley voters who are going to have a tough time supporting Joe Biden. And I would say to them that, look, I have never voted for a Democrat a day in my life, but I have publicly stated that if my choices are Trump versus Biden, that I would be willing to put policy aside and cast my vote for Joe Biden for democracy. And I think that Joe Biden needs to lay out that case tonight in his speech, because democracy is under attack right now. If the thought of Donald Trump being able to be our leader again. And I think that he needs to spell that out tonight and make that case and appeal to those voters. And I thought that Biden smartly responded when Nikki Haley dropped out of the race by saying, look, there's a place for you in my campaign. To her supporters, because Donald Trump, he said that anyone who supported for Nikki Haley would be, quote, permanently barred from MAGA. And so he clearly doesn't have any interest in trying to win over their support. But even if Joe Biden is able to win over a fraction of those supporters, then this election is going to be marginally close, and those people could be the deciding factor.
Take us inside just a little bit, because, again, you worked for Donald Trump, and, of course, you were January 6th was like, yep, that's a no for me. And wisely, I think that you decided democracy actually matters more. But I think you had a breaking point, right? But take us inside. What is it about Joe Biden, who, for those of us who've been observing him for a long time, is a down-the-line moderate? He's not even a progressive. Their progressives are not happy with him and his Gaza policy, et cetera. So he's definitely a moderate. What is it about Joe Biden that enrages Republicans so much?
I think there are a lot of Republicans right now who kind of view the state of the country as not great. And that's evidenced in the polling in Joe Biden's approval rating. They say that the economy isn't doing well. Obviously, we know that there are metrics that shows that the economy is improving. Mm-hmm. But I think that when inflation hit its peak in 2022, people are still recovering from that. So maybe the effects of the current economy just haven't trickled down yet. And so I think Joe Biden needs to kind of keep making that case that the economy is improving. I think he's got some time between now and November that the economy will get even better. And so hopefully that will bode well for him. But then I think these Republicans also look at issues like immigration, and they haven't been happy with his leadership on it. And to be quite frank, I haven't been necessarily happy with his leadership on it. I think he had 3 years to do something about it, and he kind of avoided this issue. And now when we're seeing it's one of the top issues for voters, obviously he tried to strike a deal with House Republicans, and they shot that down because they want Donald Trump to be able to campaign on this issue rather than find a solution, which is really disappointing. But that's why I'm hopeful that tonight in Biden's State of the Union speech, that he will use this as an opportunity to hopefully announce some executive action on the border, because I think that that could be a way to appeal to these types of Republicans who are not really wanting to support Trump, but might have a hard time voting for Joe Biden.
So we know that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is getting on more ballots sort of around the country, and it's not even clear who he hurts more, whether it's, people who are anti-vax tend to support him, but progressives who thought maybe supporting him, he's to the right of Joe Biden on things like Israel. So it's not clear who he would attract. Because it does feel like a lot of this is team jersey stuff, right? You're either a D or an R. It's like being a sports fan, and you just only vote for your team. And so even if your team person is terrible, you're like, well, yeah, but they're not the other team. And so it feels like that's some of the way Americans vote. Is there a possibility that that is where Nikki Haley's voters go? Because he doesn't seem to really fit them either. But is this a situation where people would rather vote third party than vote Biden, in your view?
I think there will be some people who vote third party. I'm not sure if Nikki Haley supporters will go there.
Yeah.
I think what we're going to end up seeing, though, is probably just a lot of people leaving the top of their ballot blank or maybe writing someone in.
Yeah.
And to those people, I would say that I would encourage them to vote for Joe Biden, even if they don't agree with the policies. I think that the threat that we face as a country of Trump is so unique that we need to be able to put partisanship aside and save our democracy, because that's quite frankly what I'm worried about. If Donald Trump is elected president again, it will be the end of our democracy as we know it. He has said that he would be a dictator on day one. He has said that he wants to install loyalists across the government to carry out every wish and demand. There wouldn't be people of good character to push back on his worst instincts. And so those people should probably, instead of wasting their vote on a third party who would never win, vote for Joe Biden.
I hope that a lot of people listen to you, because our democracy genuinely is at stake. Coming from somebody who worked for the man, that is serious business, y'all. Listen to this lady. Sarah Matthews, thank you so much. We appreciate you.